Thank you for participating in the NIA and NHLBI Entrepreneur Workshop Series. This workshop covers the topic of Value Propositions and Differentiation. This breakout room, moderated by John Reinhart and Diane Ignar, discusses the topic of creating a successful go-to-market strategy.
In this breakout session, two of us are EIRs that are embedded with the National Institute on Aging. Myself, as I mentioned, I'm digital health, age tech, consumer health. That's where I do most of my expertise work. I'm joined by Diane Ignar, who's a EIR who has therapeutics, device, biotech background. And so we like to say sometimes it's the difference between requires FDA approval and doesn't require FDA approval, but that's still probably a really high level of dividing on sort of how we work with portfolio companies. Diane, do you want to say a quick couple introductions and a couple seconds of introduction? And then Diane and I'll both answer your questions. I'm going to introduce the other two helpers, the other two partner team members that are in our room too. Diane, go ahead and say it.
Hi, everyone. I'll just say that, yes, my background is mainly in pharmaceuticals and also somewhat in devices. I was at GSK for 22 years and have been in the biopharma arena over the last 5 years. I've had quite a bit of experience coaching companies on their business strategy as a Duke University mentor in residence, and I've just joined NIA, and I'm looking forward to having the discussion today, and I'm happy to help help you in your journey as you're basically developing your technologies and therapeutics.
Great, thanks for having. So on the phone also, Chelsea Jones from Ogilvy, who's helping moderate and manage the organizational part of the call. We really appreciate her. And then our partner at NIA, Joy Tolliver, who's a program analyst at NIA. Joy, do you want to say a couple introduction words and we'll get going?
Hi, everyone. Yes, as John mentioned, I'm a program analyst in the Office of Small Business Research, and I lead the entrepreneurial investor initiatives with my colleague, Sarosh Regni. And I'll just be here helping with the chats. If you have a question, please put it in the chat box to everyone so that we can see those and get to your questions.
Great. So we have a whole lot of pre-delivered questions to us, and we're going to maybe just start with the top one. The reason to have Diane and myself as two different perspectives is the answers may be different depending on the kind of company you are. But the first question we have is, at what stage should the startup develop a marketing strategy, is the first question. So Diane, do you want to maybe comment in terms of the companies that you would work with in the life sciences and biotech space, how you would comment on that?
Sure. So I think it actually really depends on, as you said before, the company. So, a device company that's going to market that may in 2 years have a technology on the market, it's critical to get started as early as possible. The other end of the spectrum could be a company that's developing a therapeutic in a novel space where the indication doesn't yet have an approved medication, and that company may not intend to develop the medicine all the way through clinical, phase 1, 2, 3 clinical trials to registration. Instead, they may think, well, I'm going to try to license at IND or at proof of concept. And so the amount of time that the company would need to spend on actual marketing may not be as great as a company that's going to market a device. But I will also say that having that strategy, so your go-to-market strategy, in some ways, as John mentioned before, may be very much your exit strategy. So are you going to license? Are you looking for an acquisition of your company? To what point do you think you're going to take the technology before partnering or trying to find a strategic that's going to acquire? Or are you going to actually go to market? And so it affects what you need to concentrate on with regard to the strategy. And we can talk more about elements of strategy in a moment.
Great. So I would make the comment on digital health, and we're seeing a lot of health tech and age tech health and the whole consumerism aspect of living at home, and not just quality of care, but quality of life. One of the big things for us is to develop with our companies on the early stage, who's the customer, right? The marketing strategy falls from who you're selling to and how you're going to sell. So if the sale is an exit to a partner, then identifying that, and that's Diane's expertise in space. But in our quadrant, I think this is very critical, almost from the beginning, because I think the nice part about it is entrepreneurs pivot and strategies pivot, but you have to make assumptions and put some kind of assumptions down to gear your budgeting, your fundraising, your product development, your features and benefits, and knowing who the customer is. Very different if it's the payer, then it's the hospital, then it's the physician office, then it's the consumer, then it's the family member of the consumer. So the earlier the better, especially in the digital health world. The next question is, how do I create a business model for technology that we have developed? This is talking about throughput of an organoid culture. Diane, do you want to comment? This is not a direct space that I've got a lot of background in, but maybe this is one of those questions in our group that's just too specific to probably address today, wouldn't you think?
Yeah, I think that whoever asked that question, if they're online, it might be helpful to have an offline conversation about that specific question.
Okay, and then we have the next question we have is, what is the most effective approach to get buying in from prospective customers and partners? So this could be pretty widespread, right? This could go to a licensing deal or a go-to-market deal. What would be some of your thoughts on that?
So John, you mean the customers themselves? This is about
the customer or partner. How do you go about sort of enticing them or introducing to them to? I think this is really a customer discovery question.
Yeah, I think so. So I was going to say that the go-to-market strategy, in my opinion, is really predicated on benefit, and the work that you do early on kind of the who, what, where, when, and why of your product strategy is critical. And so that includes who's your customer. And depending on what your technology is, that could be the healthcare provider, it could be the hospital administrator, it could be the payer, it could be all of them. And so defining who not only receives benefit, but who makes the decisions is critical. I have always advocated with companies, it's never too early to go out and start to have conversations with physicians or payers about your technology, about what it is, why there's benefit over other technologies that or medicines that are already marketed or in development. And I think that basically going out and having those discussions will, in my experience, affect your view of your own product, and it will help you understand how you should be using your product, what's the best lead indication, for instance, for a medicine. And so the more work I think that you do on the do you need it piece, on the benefit piece, it's kind of the bedrock of your go-to-market strategy.
Well, this is really a question too that dovetails with another question we got that talks about who in the organization or how does the organization find expertise to figure it out, right? So so I'll take that just directly, and then Diane, if you want to jump in too. So the first question is, everybody thinks they hire a chief marketing officer or chief marketing person who goes out and figures this out, or hires a consultant or expertise. I think consulting expertise is definitely advisory to get an idea of the landscape and the competitors. I don't think that you can separate yourself from understanding the competitive landscape, but I don't think that founders and innovators that have limited time, that may even be full-time professors or so forth, or their teams, have time to necessarily go through the due diligence of a proper competitive analysis. But at the same time, you can't not understand it for yourself to apply it, because sometimes consultants are great at bringing data together, but how to apply that data to what to do. I would say that there has to be some initiation at the highest level of product development or product design or business model design that has to be engaged to do a voice of the customer. I think a lot of people that they just don't want to, it's not their comfort zone. They might be introverted, and they just really thinking about conversations with key opinion leaders or potential customers becomes a very troublesome sort of stress building opportunity, but maybe that's where the expert can facilitate a call and you can have a joint call like we're doing now. But I think it has to be somebody with expertise in how to do landscape differentiation, competitive analysis. And I think it has to involve the decision makers and drivers of the company to the understanding of what to do with the information, because it's not just about getting it, it's about using it appropriately. Did you want to add anything, Diane, or I'm going to?
Yeah, actually, I just wanted to make sure that everyone's aware. I mean, as a former SBIR recipient, I was not aware of some of the tools that are and benefits that are available to you. So the technical and business assistance, the TABA program, I'd encourage you to talk with your program officers if you're on this call and not from NIA. Basically, there's in your phase 1, you can apply for some monies, but there's also a TABA needs assessment that can be done that gives you kind of a landscape of regulatory and differentiation, et cetera, that can really help you. For your phase 2 SBIR, there's a 50K TABA that can be applied for at that time. And I think that, talking with your program officer about the TABA program, that those monies can be used to assist with bringing in consultants, as John was just suggesting. I think a lot of times small companies feel they don't have the money to bring in a good commercial consultant or a good regulatory consultant, or the people that you really need that have the expertise to help you build your go-to-market strategy. There is the possibility of getting support through the TABA program. So again, I encourage you to talk with your program officer about applying, when to apply, and what the program is in the different institutes.
We have a large audience on the group here, so would anybody like to unmute themselves and ask a direct question, or we can go through the pre-submitted questions continually, or you can put it in the chat box and we can grab it from somebody watching there. Does anybody on the call want to unmute and ask a question related to this topic? Or has anybody on the call done a TABA assessment, needs assessment, or involved in thinking about how experts, I always find peer-to-peer learning is the best. I work as an EIR part-time, but I'm a serial entrepreneur also, and I have companies in the space that I engage with. And I know it can be almost too much to try to strategically think and operationally think simultaneously in terms of committing your time. But does anybody have either a story or a background or something where this has benefited them that we can benefit from you sharing with the group, or do you want us to keep going through the list? All right, well, I guess that's a vote for going through the list. So we'll go down to the list again, right? So some of these questions cross over the value proposition. One of them is, how do you characterize your solution concisely but completely? But compellingly, I'm sorry, not completely, compellingly. I think this concept of an elevator pitch, you hear about elevator pitches as it relates to entrepreneurship. And this is the concept that if you're in an elevator with an investor and you're trying to interest them, and it could work for a strategic partner, it could work for a customer, what would be your comments in the time between an elevator riding no more than 10 floors to the bottom, which is a couple minutes. And I think Don brought up a good point. The exercise of writing it down and practicing it makes it sort of concise, and it's the elements that he talked about in the value proposition. Go to market is a subset of the elements in the value proposition. And so Diane and I commented that it really crosses over quite a bit, and some of the questions do. But in terms of, is anybody on the call, do you all have elevator pitches? Have you thought about elevator pitches? I know if you worked with an accelerator, there's been some elevator pitches that are out there. Does anybody have an example of doing that or liking that concept? All right, well, that's Diane, do you want to make a comment about the idea of succinctly and compellingly capturing your business as you move it to the market and move it to encounters with partners and investors? Or
so if I understand the question correctly, it's really about explaining your solution in a concise way. And I think, again, if you can bring to life the problem, so if you were doing an elevator pitch, I was just talking with another entrepreneur this morning about this. You know, if you can bring to life very quickly, maybe even with a vignette about a patient, what the problem is, it's very obvious then, you know, how your solution, you can explain then, this is, if our solution had existed, this is what would have been the outcome for this patient. This is just one example. But I also want to hit on what Don was saying earlier about differentiation, about competition, because in my experience, the place where I think most entrepreneurs don't concentrate, they concentrate on their technology, on their solution. They often don't think about competition and how you differentiate and why do you need this? So it's part of the problem statement, part of it, you know, who is it for? Why do you need it? And really creating, it's not only about your solution, but more importantly, creating the story around the burning platform and why you really need this technology versus anything else that's out there or in development. And if you can do that and show reason to believe data on top of it, and in comparison to other medicines or technologies that are marketed or in development, to say, this is why you need it, this is why we're better, and here's some data to show you that it works, and we're better than comparators, because that is one of the first questions you'll get from an investor. So as you are doing your validation experiments, I encourage you, if you can, to include a comparator, whether it's a device or a therapeutic, so that you have that data when you're asked for it by an investor.
This is a good follow-up, and I'll take the first try at it, and then Diane, you can add value too. Define the competitive landscape, right? So I'll give you a view from a digital health world, consumer health. So if we chose to want to be cared for at home in a way that gave safety and gave clinical relevancy to whatever we may be incorporating in our health status, what we really want is wellness, right? We want wellness. We want wellness of mind, body, spirit. We don't just want care. We're not looking to go home and have, even though hospital at homes may be a more compelling than hospital in the hospital, you know, acute care in the hospital, it's still, that is acute care. And your setting is the elements around your care that bring you more wellness. But when you get about competitive landscaping, one of the first things that's really hard, I think, as an entrepreneur and an innovator, if you're a disruptive innovator, is the one big competitor is do nothing. The competitor is status quo in some regards, because we have to get people to change behavior, change attitudes. Status quo, it's easy to do nothing. So don't underestimate that not having to do it just because you think it's novel and neat doesn't mean that they have to do it. So they're compelled to do nothing. The second thing is doing it manual. We all think, because we grew up with the bridging of electronics and internet to the electronic age, there's a lot of elderly and older people I work with that the idea of engaging in an electronic world is not as easy for them in a mindset and maybe even physically as it is to do things in a manual fashion. So don't assume that it's software to software and features and benefits to features and benefits, capabilities and price even. Maybe even the 4 Ps aren't as relevant as who's the user. And they get to this idea of universal design. You know, if my eyes, now that I have to use cheaters, can't read the software, it doesn't matter how good the software is. If the colors, you know, intersect, and if the flow of the buttons don't make sense, I'm not looking like for any of you all, you know, the oversized products because I'm older, right? But I'm also not looking at things that are not usable because the universal design principles were not in there. And that's especially true in the device world, especially true in the world where even if it's paid for by your insurance company and it comes home, it will not be adopted. And so what we really want in diffusion is the adoption of the usability of the innovation, not just it got deployed, because deployed without use is a very small relevance and not the goal. How would that be viewed when they're looking at devices and therapeutic drugs, Diane? How would you define what the competitive landscape question would look like for them to think about?
I mean, I think in the case, I like your concept of do nothing being a competitor. I haven't really thought about it that way before. I mean, I was talking earlier about, what's the burning platform? Why should you do anything? But it's true. When you think about a therapeutic and just how much it costs and how many years it takes to develop one, a de novo therapeutic, there has to be a very good reason why it's needed. And so when you look at the competitive landscape, it's not only what's already marketed in a particular indication, but what's in development. And so there are ways, this is getting a little bit logistical, but obviously you can go to, and you should go to clinicaltrials.gov for a therapeutic to see what clinical trials are underway. There are databases that contain information that you can get access to that can help you collate. Again, if you worked with the consultant helping you with your commercial plan, et cetera, they can help you with your competitive environment. But it's really important to, very, I guess, rigidly or robustly compare and try to objectively compare your asset to what is being developed, their timelines versus what you expect your timelines to be with regard to launch, and also against what's out there. And that's why interviewing physicians and payers about the environment and what they know is coming and how they view your mechanism or your technology and whether they're jumping up and down about it or giving you a lukewarm response, it really does help you understand how important is this. And they may help you figure out, where should I position this? Because it may be that the competitive environment for the indication that you thought you were going after is just, there's too much there, but there may be a niche for your product that the other competitors can't fill. And so looking for those niches is also very important, because there may be a value that maybe you haven't considered before. And sometimes these other the voice of customer work that you do will help you winnow that out.
Again, anybody can unmute. We'd love to have audience participation. We do thank you for all the questions you did send in, which are a number. We could go for as long as everybody's interested, because we have a lot of questions. Would there be anybody in the audience that would want to jump in and ask a live question, or jump in and comment on any of the topics that we've played, just so we can give you the opportunity? We're happy to have you, and we'd like to hear from you. Good group, huh? Listeners and learners, huh? So that's good. That's okay. So this is a question that got into pricing, right? And so the question is, do you price by sort of your competition, Don's point, cheaper, faster, better, or do you price by features and benefits? In other words, premium pricing. That's a really good question. It's a really hard question. I guess the question is, there's a difference, and we all know we do it, but we don't really think about it in this way. There's a great difference in perceived value. People pay for perceived value. That doesn't mean it's necessarily more expensive to make, more features and benefits. They pay for branding. They pay for positioning. I mean, we don't want a knockoff, iPhone. I mean, if it's called, G phone, we get introduced to brands, we get introduced to quality, we get introduced to reputations. And then that offers price elasticity to the distributor or the manufacturer, the inventor. And it's based on the novelty of it, and it's based on the features and benefits of it. But I guess the key is going to be, if the only way you're thinking about going to market is we're cheaper than the next guy or the next, innovation, I think it's the wrong mindset. I think the mindset has to be, what's the value we're creating and what's it worth, and worth could be increased revenue, worth could be decreasing expenses, worth could be increasing market perception. I mean, there's a lot of worths than Don was getting to quantifying it. But if you're doing an innovation, the idea of how you quantify its worth, as opposed to, we're $5 cheaper or whatever, I think the mindset has to be, what's the market view of its worth, and what features and benefits, because features and benefits will always be enhanced, maybe not in the drug device world as much as the consumer digital health world. There's always going to be a list of things the customer says, add this, add that, add this, add that. that becomes revisions and versions. Then you end up with maybe it's an original price plus modules or additions or add-ons. And so the ultimate price ends up being bigger. But, I always use the Mattel example. When you build profitable business models, Mattel's profitable business model was make sure everybody had a Barbie doll. But once everybody had a Barbie doll, they bought accessories and clothes and campers and Ken doll. And I use that to illustrate, because we all remember our childhood, and the addition of one single element opened the door for a bunch of other elements that were tied to the first element. That would be my comment. Diane, do you want to add to that from a sort of pharma device perspective?
Sure. I guess, I agree with your comments. The only thing I'll add is, I'm not a forecaster, but I have worked with commercial forecasters, and depending on, so if you're trying to create a forecast and you need to decide on what pricing to use to have a reasonable forecast, I think that it's easier, obviously, if there are market predicates. And so they can do a market-based forecast, and there'll be some assumptions around pricing. You may go ahead and say, I'm going to assign a premium because we have a benefit beyond whatever else is on the market. I think where it becomes more difficult and why it's important to get some expert help on this is that when you have a novel therapeutic and a novel indication, maybe one that's underdiagnosed, you don't really know what the patient population is. I think it can be much more difficult to assign a price. In some ways, the pricing will be pressure tested much later in development for a therapeutic like that. I think for devices, it's more near term and possibly easier to try and decide what the pricing is in the market, and can I try to assign a premium. But yeah, that's the only comment I'd make.
Yeah, again, open to any questions. Anybody can add value. We appreciate it. We can learn from you also. But let's turn our attention to strategic partnerships. Okay. So strategic partnership seems to be sort of a go-to. Everybody wants a partnership, strategic partner. But that could be a distributor in a device world. That could be a licensee in a pharma world. That could be a distributor and or a reseller in the digital health world. Overall, maybe you and I can both make general comments about strategic partnership. We have at least 4 questions that are down this topic, but what makes a good one? When should I? How should I? What should I? Diane, why don't you lead off in terms of for a therapeutic or a device company, what is the strategy on strategic partnerships? When should it initiate? What should you be thinking? What are some of the high general tips about putting that in play? Because I think that, to me, at least from the outsider of what I do know, that is a lot of the exit strategy. You get in bed with the right strategic partner and you just perform. And when you perform, they have sales and marketing and everything waiting for you. Can you maybe give some overview thoughts on that?
Sure. So, it really depends on the technology or therapeutic, or you could be a biological CRO, and so your partnerships might occur quite early because you're looking to provide a service to a strategic partner. For a therapeutic, it's important to think about when a strategic partnership would make the most sense, depending on how far you're willing to take a medicine, and whether it makes sense because a certain strategic has the right technology or the right expertise for your therapeutic. You may want to have a license right at candidate or right at IND. Other small companies may wish to kind of take it all the way to POC or basically in the clinic, or have a co-development situation where they co-develop and then perhaps there's a final license of that asset. So there's a lot of, I will say that there are many different forms of strategic partnerships in therapeutics, and to be open. So if you have enough data, so you have good pharmacology data, IP, some safety, where you can start your conversations with various pharma, they're going to kind of give you an idea of when they would take an asset like this on, when they would want to license it. Do they want to basically run the clinical trials and they don't want the small company involved? So I think having conversations early, having enough data so it's a good conversation, and you can get in the door and have a review by their scientists. And I can tell you, as a former scientific licenser, if you're able to get a review by the scientists within a pharma, that's really a positive sign, because most of the opportunities that came across my desk, I couldn't bother, send them to the scientists, every one of them, right? You have to go through and triage and say, well, this is of interest strategically to our company, so I'll have the scientists review it. So that's actually a really positive sign. If you can get into a meeting, that's excellent. And then you can really begin in that meeting to discuss what they would want to see as far as further data, what types of deals they're doing right now, because each pharma has slightly different ways that they like to structure their deals. And so I would just be very open, try to start the conversations at the appropriate time when you have enough information to really cast your medicine or technology in the best light. From a device perspective, it's really a matter, I think, of determining what your exit strategy is. Are you looking to be acquired? Do you need someone's help with manufacturing? It really just depends on the capabilities of your company and the capabilities of others in the field, and determining what would be the best marriage for you to move your technology forward.
Perfect. Well, and so in the health tech, digital health, age tech world, we start thinking about profitable business models, right? So when you think about a strategic partnership, you're thinking about more of a just distribution partnership. And I'll just give you two high-level metrics. There's 70 million baby boomers in the U.S. out of 365 million thereabouts population. So if you think you can go directly to consumers of age, if that's your solution and you're in the digital health tech world, the marketing of going direct to 70 million people, even with social media and the influence of family members to adult children to their parents and so forth, there's a lot of influencer layers that are involved in that. The second thing, the metric I'll give you, is there's a little over roughly 15,100 skilled nursing facilities in the U.S., right? They each have probably an average bed size of about 100. So if you think about you're going to go to skilled nursing facilities, then one of the big questions comes, the partnerships are not only, they're highly regulated. Most of their revenue comes from the federal government. So they're highly regulated. Most of it is not private, personal monies or family monies that are in that. And in between is assisted living, independent living, these adult senior living communities. And they're mostly families. I mean, they're adults living in community as opposed to living in their individual home where they had a neighborhood, or living in long-term care because they needed health care. So the question is going to be, when you get to distributors, most distributors on the wholesale and retail level, they're going to take 30 to 40%, depending on the roles and responsibilities of what they do. And mostly what they're supposed to do is sales and marketing and distribution. They have access to the buyer, being the organization, the community, or the customers in a community. And they are able to, for their percentage of the sale price, they're able to do the heavy lifting to get you in front of the right purchaser. When it gets to payers, it's more complicated. When an insurance company, they do pay per month, per person per month, kind of stipends on insurance policies, but that's a nuance. But that's why it's really paramount. You get to go to market. Your go to market is not only who's the customer. Your go to market is what's the business model to go reach the customer. And I give you those paradigms only so you can have a sensibility around how complicated this could get, but most importantly, how you have to build for the profitability or the reasonable expectation of profitability. Obviously, if you have low volume of anything, it's not going to be super profitable. But the idea that if you don't have scalability built into your business model, you could have a single deliverable of a very profitable solution that can't scale, and that's not really an entity that has viability. So it looks like we got maybe one question. What are the average PM rates for digital health? That's a good question. I haven't really seen other than the risk-based arrangements of managed care, the investment by payers into digital health tools. I think, and I recognize that it's one of our good companies that we work with. I think the key is going to be what is going to compel a digital health company to put the sensors in, to put the remote monitoring, to put the risk management tools in, to have the payback of the lower occurrence rate or the lower return to hospitalization rate or hospitalization days, as you saw that other chart. I think that we haven't reached the crossing the chasm, so to speak, of digital health supplemented with payer funds. But I think there are a lot of pilots going on that will give us that answer over the long term. But I think it's going to have to be a risk-based insurance relationship. So it could be the managed care plans that have, that keep or that share part of the savings, but it has to be something of that nature. Do we have any other questions? So I think the official stop was 3:30. Is that correct? We still have a number of people on the phone. We still have a number of questions. If you all are okay to go on, Diane, are you okay? Joey, was the official stop 3:30 or Chelsea? Or did I get that wrong? Do we have time still? Hello? Joy or Chelsea, do we have time to continue?
Hi, yes, we can go until 3:45 about 10 more minutes.
Perfect. Okay. If you all want to keep going. Thanks for that question, Christian. I appreciate that. I think that's it's a compelling beginning of that transition to home that I was talking to you about, where payers will have to, in my opinion, bring the one good question about that is telehealth, and the emergence of telehealth during the pandemic has shown that it's better for everybody to go ahead and do that under the circumstances where it makes total sense. Telepsychiatry, telehealth, telephysical therapy, all those have elements that can make it cost effective and very efficient and valuable for the recipient of care. Did you have anything else to add, Diane, before I go back to the questions?
No, go ahead, back to the questions.
Okay, so let's see here. We got, let's see. So when we talk about how can I differentiate my prospective solutions so early in the technology research phase? So I guess the question here, and I don't know if the person's on the phone or not, do you think, Diane, there's a certain achievement or milestone or something in the phase one research or outcomes or data that sort of says it's time to put a brand on this, not just a project number or a project sort of trial, right? Because I mean, he's saying where early in the research where he or she thinks about, I got to develop some kind of brand or name or I'm assuming it's a drug. I'm assuming that's an inference to a drug, right? Because the drug gets some kind of clinical number, right? And it goes through the trial. And then at some point, is there an element of certain milestone where brand becomes important?
I think it's in therapeutics, it's quite a ways down the road before you would worry about branding and brand strategy. And so that would be, and often for most biotechs, they already have a strategic partner, there's been a license. And so it's really a pharma or somebody else who's taken on the product. And they'll worry about that. For devices, I think it is, I'm not a commercial expert in devices, but I would say that what I have seen is that the branding occurs, fairly early on. It depends on how many years to the clinic for your device. If it's fairly rapid, then yes, I mean, you're going to think about branding early in the process. But it just depends on, I mean, I know of one company that was working on a device where they're going to have to do clinical trials for 8 years. So they probably don't need to worry about that so much if what their real concern is clinical trials. And I'll just segue to say that every company, as you've been hearing, is different, whether therapeutic, device, diagnostic, if you're a CRO with services. And so I think we're happy to talk with companies. The EIRs in general are happy to talk with companies about their specific case, because it's really hard to talk in generalities about some of these questions. And so it really has to do with the timing of your asset, stage of your asset, what your asset is, what's your exit strategy. All of those affect what your go-to-market strategies, who are your customers. And so I think working through all of that for each case is really important, and we can help advise on that.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of comments that we've sort of touched on in terms of the questions, but with only 4 minutes, I want to open it up one more time to our colleagues. I know we appreciate the one message question. There's a lot of people on the phone. If somebody wants to unmute and ask a question, we're happy to do it. Happy to have them. So the one thing that I would tell you is, I think I really want to reinforce one thing I left in the prior my prior comments on the opening slides. Healthcare is very, very unique, and it's because it has two dimensions. One is quality of life, and that is the dimension that we want wellness, right? We don't want good sick care, we want wellness. But when we aren't well, we want good sick care. So the idea of quality care and quality of life are intersecting here in this innovative world. And both of them may have elements of both, right? They may have improved your life because you feel better. But the second thing there is the hardest part of being an entrepreneur in aging tech and aged care, where I've been, is determining the customer, right? Because the customer right now, in my mind, that's who I build and who paid me, right? And that's not really in healthcare. That's probably the farthest thing from actual truth. The people that are using it in consumers, unless they're augmenting some other kind of payer source, are probably the people that it's either been prescribed to, recommended to, encouraged by somebody in their circle to, and or it's insurance reimbursable to get them to have the item or your solution or your innovation. So to separate the purchaser from the influencer, from the user consumer, has to be a mindset that you get into very early. And then once you determine the customer, it's not the user, you're almost in a duality of producing for a user that's not paying you. So the economics have to fit who's paying you, but the features and benefits have to fit who's using it. And so it is a little bit more complicated, and I do wish you all very much the strong outcomes that you seek, the passion that you deliver. It's really just a joy for Diane and I to be able to encounter you and learn about you, your story, why you did it. Storytelling is very important. Diane, you touched on it about customer testimonials, but the power of storytelling now to communicate your innovation, is that, can you give maybe just a final comment on that?
Actually, I was just talking with someone today about this. They were going to be doing a pitch, a 10-minute pitch. Many of you will be going to these types of meetings. Having the most powerful presentations that I've seen are those where they can take a patient story to illustrate the problem that needs to be solved and how your technology will help that patient. And that can then be generalized to others. But being able to, with your first slide, talk about the problem in terms that grab people, that I want to help this person or these children or whoever it is. Being able to show that in a very succinct way with actual stories, especially if you're in a meeting with many presenters, being able to grab folks so they listen and go, I want to invest in that. That's a fantastic medicine. That's what you're trying to do when you're talking about your problem.
And I'm going to touch on one more thing, since somebody went out and sent the message in on the chat box. Sleep health has become a very compelling issue right now, not only because of COVID and the pandemic and the whole sort of respiratory system that's involving in, but sleep health is significant. The comment was, with the recall of the CPAP machines from Philips related to sleep apnea treatment, is there room in to fund innovations in the space? I can't speak directly for the institutes of NIA or NHLBI, but I think that is a very fruitful area for development and innovation, and sleep health. And I think sleep apnea is becoming a prevailing diagnosis for more and more people. And so I just encourage you that whatever the modality, whatever the fields you're farming or the fruits you're seeking, I think you've got to just do your research and do your homework And then, and since we had some good guidance, make sure it has a value proposition. I mean, I hate to that succinctly, but if you can't write down something in a paragraph that says what value you're bringing and why it's different, it's very difficult to think that it will be able to be sort of communicated well in an elevator pitch and an investor presentation. A lot of what we get to do too is prepare you all for investor opportunities and stakeholder meetings. And that's a pleasure also to see the evolution of the communication of your all's ideas and your all's innovations. But kudos to all the innovators on the call. We appreciate all the researchers and investigators. Thank you, Diane. It's a pleasure to work with you, and Joy and Chelsea. We always appreciate you and how you keep this thing moving in the right direction. And it's such a great opportunity. With that, is there anything else, Joy or Chelsea, we need to say or do other than register for the next session? And I know, please at least make sure we get all the surveys back, because we really can't do this without your input, because this is for you and about you and for benefit to you, and we really need that feedback. Chelsea, Joy, anything?
No, John, thank you. Thank you everyone for attending today.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.